Guess who got brands talking? Brandlife.co.za.
Morning, everybody. Welcome back to the WITEE Chatterbots show. You have tuned in this morning into our show, Women in Tech, Empowering Everyone. I am Carmen, a business professional, and I specialize in technology, innovation, and strategy. We are coming live from the Brand Life studio in the Bohemian city of Melville, 27 boxes. And this show is designed to give you a taste of topics we explore with heavyweights, mavens, and disruptors, and to give you a whole new perspective on the changing landscape in business, as well as education, and how to evolve and adapt. Now, today's guest, drum roll, we're welcoming you back. Aitchison was here last week, and we were actually having a chat, or an incredible chat actually, about how to educate a child for the 22nd century based on a free ebook that you can actually find online. But you're going to have to go and listen to the previous episode to find out how you can get that book. But welcome back, Jax. Lovely to have you back.
Thank you, Carmen. Thanks very much.
So I think last week was quite interesting because we were chatting about the winning trifecta between parent, teacher, and child, how the education system has changed and how we need to adapt and evolve.
Correct.
It's also using the farmer mentality, the process of education, the role that tech plays in the classroom, and I had so much fun talking about it. And this episode is actually leading us into the hottest topic in education, which is about the Finnish education system. Yeah. And today we want to talk about what lessons in education we can learn from Finland and how we can apply that in South Africa, if possible. Right. Is the question. So I think first put it in context. Maybe you can give us a little bit of background. Why you're so passionate about this particular topic and some of the work that you've been doing around this.
Well, we've been in education for a long time, and we've looked at it from various different contexts, internationally as well as the South African system, and we're always watching to see what is best for our children and what they're going to be needing going forward. So, as you said, there's so much hype around the Finnish education system. And so we started looking into why. What is this hype? When did it start? How did they put all this together? We were at the International Confederation of Principals Conference at the end of last year. And a chap called Ari Pocker, he was the president of that confederation until the end of 2017. He's actually handed over the presidency to a South African lady.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You? No, definitely not. Shock and horror. And he's written a book as well. It's called Top Class. It's Finnish Schools Leadership.
Oh, wow.
So it was just delving into all of that and obviously doing so from a critical perspective, because you want to analyze, well, what could be applicable in the South African context? We're talking about two very vastly different cultures. So could there be elements of that very successful system that we could implement here in South Africa? That's why we've been looking into it.
I love that. I was watching a motivational video the other day, and they were talking about if you look at a car, I think when was the first car? In the 40s?
20s?
It must have been that. I remember Hitler with the Beetle. It was in the 40s. I don't know. Okay. I don't know my history very well. But the first car, if you have to compare it today to Tesla.
Yeah.
And how the car has evolved.
Yeah.
And you look at a mobile phone, the first time a mobile phone was introduced, it was this big box that you carried around and you were mobile. And then later, look where the smartphone has evolved, and they even reckon that in the next 5 or 10 years, we're moving now into the dawn of the fourth technology transformation, which means that we are going to move away from what we carry with us to what we wear. So it's all about the Internet of Things and the mixed realities and other world. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. But what hasn't changed in many, many situations is education.
Yeah.
So education, if you look at in the age of Socrates, standing
Yes.
in front, teaching,
Yes.
and have students that lift their hands up and ask for permission to say something. In most classrooms, this is what we see. And I think what makes this this whole new approach of what the Finnish education system is applying is that whole effect of collaboration. But maybe you can take us more into depth around this education system and what are they doing that's so amazing, and give us some context.
Well, I think you would first of all be surprised. I think most people are surprised when you really delve into the format of the education system, the years that they're in basic education, pre-education, basic education, what they call upper secondary, and that's essentially our FET phase, the grade 10, 11, 12. It's remarkably similar. The ages that the children do it at, because that's all based on cognitive development. So the ages are very, very similar. And I think that's quite surprising. People are assuming that it's radically different to what we do here.
Exactly.
And it's not actually the case. Where the systems are different, it's essentially an implementation of the systems. That's where the differences are. And there are two big differences that I've noted. The first one is on essentially how they focus on the objectives of their curriculum and the assessment of their curriculum. There's a big difference there between what they are doing and what we are doing. And there's a massive difference in the teacher training.
Okay.
So Finnish teacher training and South African teacher training, those are two areas where you can see marked differences.
Could we delve into those?
Sure. When you're talking about curriculum objectives and how they do that, they have. I read an article where they actually just kept talking about less is more in the Finnish system. So it's fewer subjects that are delved into a lot more deeply than we tend to do.
Okay.
So all South African education is based on CAPS. Everyone's familiar with CAPS. It's all based on CAPS. It doesn't matter whether you're writing the IEB, the Independent Education Board's Examination Board's exam, or the government NSC. It doesn't matter. You're all doing the same CAPS base. You're just being examined slightly differently on those objectives. So one of the problems, and CAPS is a great system. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of benefit to CAPS. It really is not a bad system at all. But one of the downfalls, I believe, is that it is a very, very wide system. And wide means shallow. So you tend to end up trying to fit in quantity of curriculum as opposed to quality of curriculum.
I love that.
So what they do in Finland, fewer subjects where you actually get time to delve into subjects properly. You get real depth into concepts. These children really engage. They can explore the topics. They can explore the learning extensively and really grasp it before you move on to something else. You know, a CAPS maths textbook at the moment in South Africa, for example, you know, we're jumping through topics within a day or two.
Yeah.
You've got to cram onto the next one, cram onto the next one, cram onto the next one. So these children are getting a very superficial scratching of the surface of a lot of topics. And I believe that's one of the areas that we could, in South Africa, refine. We could refine a very good system. We have a great system in CAPS, but it's been going for a few years now, and it is probably time for how can we make it even better? How can we refine that system to make it more beneficial for our children? And I believe there it's making it a bit narrower and a lot deeper.
Yeah. You know what I really love about that is the fact that it becomes more than just general knowledge, because I do find, like, I don't think I can remember 88 or maybe 90% of what I learned at school.
Yeah,
I don't.
Who would?
I mean,
Nobody
I
does.
really can't. And I think the most important thing also here is when you start diving into a subject and you're really going in deeper and deeper and deeper, it starts resonating and you start having those multiple aha moments.
And you want to do more.
You want to do more.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's definitely a brilliant approach. Talk to me about the education of teachers versus theirs. And
Sure, that's a big topic right there. So, for example, just to throw out one of the quick stats is that every teacher in Finland, if you want to teach in a school from pre-primary right through, you have to have a master's degree. You have to be at master's level to be able to qualify to teach in a
almost
school.
like a doctor.
That's it. But and it's funny you should say that, because that's the perception. To get into a teaching qualification and study that field for the Finnish people is akin to being a doctor.
Sure.
or a lawyer. It's a highbrow profession. There's a lot of prestige behind that. So
Sure.
even right from finishing up school and applying to be a teacher, they tend to take about 10% of the applicants. Only about 10% of the applicants get in to study teaching in the first place. Then they study extensively to master's level before they are put in a classroom. Now, the impact of that is you have highly skilled people sitting in a classroom, and as with any other profession, high skill level means lower supervision is required, because you can trust the professional in that context. They are very well qualified to doing what they have to do. They can adapt where they have to adapt. They can look at the diversity in the classroom and adapt to that environment, to that context every time. And you can trust that they're doing it effectively because they've been very well trained on how to do that. High quality staff, less supervision. Now, the inverse of that is a scary concept.
Sure, it's very interesting.
Yeah, so if we are dealing with a situation where our teachers are poorly trained and are not at a high skill level, what happens? We need a large amount of supervision to make sure that the job is being done correctly and appropriately for our children. And that just opens up another whole can of worms, because who's going to be doing that oversight? Are they qualified to be doing that oversight?
So you need to get, it's almost like we're always talking about the symptom of education, but it's actually getting into the cause.
You've got to get right
down there and where the problem really lies.
And this is, I think, one of the problems when we look at something like Finnish education and South African education. It becomes so overwhelming when you look at the South African context. You almost, people throw their hands up in the air and go, well, where do we even start? Do we start at the top with our teacher education and work down? Or do we start right at the bottom with our young children so that we can produce better candidates going into those qualifications? Or do we try and do both at the same time? And how do we do that?
It doesn't sound like a very easy problem to solve.
It's not going to be an easy problem to solve. It's going to take time.
Okay, so with that in mind, like one of the other things that fascinates me as well is the complaints that you usually hear that the classrooms are too full. There's too many kids in the classroom. How does the Finns like address this problem? Do they have a small amount, because you're talking about supervision, less supervision, that kind of thing. So in our country, sometimes I hear of classrooms with 60 kids in it. So what is the process there versus here when it comes to that?
Well, I think we need to contextualize that. I don't think we can ever make an accurate comparison in that regard, simply because, in Finland, we're talking of a population size that's 5.5 million, as opposed to South Africa, that's 57 million.
100%.
So we have to be very, very careful in the comparisons that we do make. We can't...
Apples to apples.
Exactly. We can't take their classroom as this utopian ideal that we are never going to be able to achieve in South Africa. And I'm not saying that we can't make smaller classes in South Africa, but maybe a better solution is the way the Finnish do a lot of group work. There's a lot of collaborative group work going on in that system. And the first thing that we think of here is, well, if you have 40, 50, 60 kids in your class and you're trying to do group work, it's just going to be mayhem. It's going to be noisy. Is it going to be productive? So once again, how do we tailor the teacher training to handle these very difficult situations that are not typical when we are talking about Eurocentric or Western education? We are different in that. We are different, and that has to be recognized. But our teacher training should also be focusing on it. Again, Finland is a very homogenous population. We are an incredibly diverse population. So a lot of our teacher training talks about that diversity, and that is absolutely essential. But that shouldn't be to the detriment of the content. Diversity includes your learning disabilities. It's not just about language in the classroom. The diversity includes that your classroom will likely have a child with ADD or ADHD or dyslexia 100%. Or that sort of thing. And it's training your teacher to handle that level of diversity. Is it better in group work? Is the fact that you're doing group work and alleviating pressure from those children? A dyslexic child tends to feel a little insecure in the classroom. They're kind of waiting for their next mistake. So if you put them in groups, does that take some of that pressure off them? Does it allow them to participate more? Would that result in better candidates ultimately applying to the universities for things like teacher training?
Yeah, I like that. And also I think of The Apprentice and those kind
Yeah.
of things is, we get a different leader to lead a different type
Yes.
of project.
Yeah.
Who do we vote for?
Yeah.
Who's the right person to lead this project, and then vote for that person, and then you need to lead and
Yeah.
to expose people. I think one of the biggest, if I have to look at my life, one of the biggest things that has developed me as a person is public speaking, because I was forced
To
to do it in my I don't think if I wasn't forced to do it now,
Yeah.
I would rather do public speaking than do cold calling.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just
Hands down.
hands down. So I do think that this whole environment of collaboration and giving people tasks and things to do,
Yes.
and apart from the fact that they delve into this topic and go deeper and
Very
deeper
deeply.
and deeper,
Yes.
I think is an incredible way to balance it out.
Yeah.
And I think also for parents that's in South Africa is look maybe beyond school and say, okay, right, my kids are going to school, keep them busy until 5:00.
Yeah.
Yes, sport, maybe you can go twice a week and play sport, and
Yeah.
it all depends on the passion of the child, obviously.
For sure, yeah.
But maybe to find extra classes that can stimulate these kind of collaboration.
Exactly.
I don't know. What do you
Exactly.
think?
Absolutely. I think if we can create environments where children can go after school, whether it's still within the ground, so that for parents who are working until later hours that they can't fetch the child. If we could create spaces for these children where they are learning skills that are more hidden curriculum or covert curriculum, they're not necessarily what you see in a textbook on a daily basis. It's things like your trial and error approach. So in your more affluent schools, they're doing that through clubs like robotics. But it shouldn't just be for those kids. It should be for everyone. How do you create that space in all schools where they can learn those vital skills? Trial and error, programming, all these skills that they're going to need going forward.
Absolutely. When you talk about things like this, I'm one of those activists. I really do fight for the more disadvantaged people, because I feel that they're being deprived. Yes, they learn how to hustle, and it's not always a bad thing, but to find a way to expose kids to to robotics, poor kids as well. We have a responsibility to get everybody future fit, not just
Absolutely.
not just a certain percentage of the public. There was this one guy, I don't know if you saw this viral video. It was fascinating. It was in Soweto. How this guy took all of these little parts that was lying around the street, and he built a robot.
It's amazing.
Out of it.
It's just
and
creativity.
it's sitting on the side of the road, and with mechanics and drills, and it can pick up things, and he made it out of plastic tops, and it went viral, and the whole world knows about this guy, and he has no education. And I think exposing people to these kind of things, especially technology, can help them to get a foot in the door in future, because if you can imagine it, you can create it.
Absolutely.
And that's the one thing. Now, a lot of people probably don't know this, but I think I need to share that. So Finland is actually known for giving us the Nokia phone. And Nokia
5110.
yes. And the Nokia phone is coming back now.
Apparently so, yeah.
Yes. And what a lot of people don't know is that's when mobile really started booming, and Africa adopted this mobile phone, and now we leapfrogged into mobile because of the Nokia phone. So thanks, Finland, very much. The other thing that they've given us, which is also mobile related but gaming related, is Angry Birds.
Oh, was that a Finnish?
It's Finnish. And heavy metal. The best heavy metal comes from Finland. But what a lot of people also don't know is that they had widespread poverty in the 70s. And they realized that alleviating poverty by leaning into good education.
Absolutely.
So this is why we are currently sitting in absolute awe when we watch a country like that disrupt in the education system, and look how they've changed their whole economy because of that.
Yes.
Now we're going to talk about that soon. We just have to go for a quick ad break, and then we'll come back on this for you.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za, an industry first in the world of internet radio. Not only are we an internet radio station, we are an internet radio platform for your brand. So why not expose your brand to potentially thousands of listeners and improve your customer relationships and brand equity with podcasts and live broadcasts? Be sure to check brandlive.co.za for more information. brandlive.co.za, harnessing the power of internet radio.
Good morning, I'm Paul Burney, founder of The Connected Marketer from the UK. You are listening in to the WITEE Chatterbots show. This is a show not to be missed. Join the conversation on #WITEE, that's WITEE, and get the podcast on brandlive.co.za.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za.
Good morning, everyone. You are tuned into the WITEE Chatterbots show, Women in Tech Empowering Everyone. And we are sitting here with Jacqueline. We are unpacking the Finnish education system, and we're having a lot of interesting talk. So for those of you who weren't listening prior, we were actually talking about the interesting facts that Finland brought us the Nokia phone, Angry Birds, and great heavy metal music. But also they had a widespread of poverty in the 70s, and they realized that alleviating poverty by learning and good education. And Jax, I really want to unpack that. What can we learn from them? And because we live in an emerging market, right?
Yeah.
We have a lot of widespread poverty.
Yeah.
Maybe you can give us some context.
Yeah, so that you're 100% right. They were experiencing significant poverty in the 70s and into the early 80s as well. And that led to very low educational standards. They were akin to countries like Peru. They were way down on the ranking. Their basic education, the same as ours, ends at the end of their year 9 or our grade 9. And 1-2 people in 10 were finishing a basic education. Tertiary education was very rare indeed in the Finnish system. So they needed to turn that around. And more than anything else, it's exactly what you've just said. It was a huge societal leaning in to the importance of education and building upon that generation after generation until they ended up in a situation where they have these really strong candidates coming out of school into one of what they consider the most prestigious degrees, which is teacher education. They're going right through to master's level on that and then going into schools to teach. But again, we have to contextualize this for South Africa. You know, even now, Finland is dealing, and again, from the 70s to now, they have reduced that poverty line significantly. So now Finland deals with a poverty line of about 6% of their population. Wow. It's tiny.
Hey, sure.
6% of 5.5 million? It's just over 300,000 people in Finland living below the poverty line. Now that's something you can do something about. You can action that. We can conceptualize that. We can deal with that. South Africa's context, very different story. Here we have a population. We have a population of 57 million. Our poverty line is over 50%. We're dealing with over 30 million below the poverty line. So Finland turned that around in essentially 3 generations. It's going to take us a lot longer. It's going to take us a lot longer. That's the reality of the situation. But it doesn't mean we throw our hands up in the air and go, oh, well, it's too big an issue. I couldn't possibly have any input here. That would be negligent and irresponsible for us as a society.
Yeah.
We also need to lean in to education. We also need to prioritize. Our government needs to prioritize. The spending needs to be prioritized, and it needs to be done properly and accountably and responsibly. If we can start doing that, we will see that lean in. So this is South Africa. Education tends to be a political tool. So this is maybe where we need to turn to the corporates. You know, corporates often want to get involved in education, but they seem to have a mandate that they have to work within, which actually, it results in me wondering how in touch they are with the situation as it is sometimes. Because,
definitely.
You know, I remember years ago with, we were trying to get, I won't mention names, one of the bigger cellular companies to help us.
Not Nokia. They are finished, you know. I'm joking.
We were trying to get help with going into less privileged schools to give extra lessons and get the literacy and the maths up. And their response was, well, unless there's tech involved, we're not interested. And I felt, you know, you're missing the boat, people. We need to teach reading.
Yeah.
Let's get down to the basics. These are people who, when we're dealing with a poverty line like this, their basic needs are food and shelter. When you're worried about where your next meal's coming from and whether you have a roof over your head, you are not thinking about the 30 million words that your child should be exposed to before the age of 3. Your priorities are different. So bringing your tech into that kind of situation, that kind of environment, really, is that the best you can do for these people? Is that going to lift them out of the situation that they are in? Wouldn't it be better to actually recognize what's in front of you and do something about that?
Yeah, it's so powerful what you're saying there. I'm thinking of, obviously the purpose for Finland was obviously to alleviate poverty with their public education system, and they realized that education is important.
Yeah.
And then I think to myself, if you think of a mosquito, an African proverb that we have, you think a mosquito can't make, oh my goodness, I just swapped the whole joke. No, not joke, but I mean the proverb. If you think you're too small to make a difference, then think of a mosquito. It's that same principle. We need to think about how we in society can make an impact, because government impossibly, they can't make an impact in 50 million people's lives. But it's about donating books. How can we get people to read the books? How can we help format that? I saw a case study. I can't go into detail about that now, but there's about in South Africa, literacy is a huge problem.
It's a big problem.
Under the age, I think, of 3 years old, a child is supposed to hear about 30 million words.
30. Well, some studies will say 32 million, but they are supposed to be exposed and interact with 30 million words on average before the age of 3 to facilitate appropriate cognitive development. Children who are not exposed, you can Google, if you just Google the 30 million word project, you'll get loads of literature on it.
Yeah.
Children who are not exposed to that, and generally it's an American study, so they refer to their welfare children. We are referring to the children below the poverty line.
Yeah.
These children are actually cognitively disadvantaged right from the start. So that's why I'm saying, where do we start? Do we start top down with teacher training, or do we start right at the bottom, or do we try and find a happy medium where we can actually bring these two together to uplift the entire situation?
And get the fundamentals right.
Correct. Because, and unfortunately, it's like everything else in the world, it comes down to funding. It always comes back to funding.
I know, and that's the scary part for me. And I think that especially corporates, as you mentioned, the CSI initiatives and how they structure things is, I think project literacy is something that everybody should get involved with, whether you are a citizen, a community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's also important to start with community work and start, going to the city hall and saying, okay, right, we want this room, and just make an effort to come into the class, and we all circulate amongst us, and we have a reading club for the kids, and start stimulating them, because these things are paramount to laying the foundations. And if you can't get the basics right, how can you get the rest right? Yeah. And I think it's being purpose driven, and this is exactly what Finland did. They were purpose driven. They knew what they wanted to achieve. But I'm going to ask you just an interesting question that I would like to understand is, obviously with this very unorthodox approach that they're using in their country, how do you measure what success looks like?
Well, this is one of the things that I've heard around the braai of late when it comes to Finnish education. They're going, oh, well, they have just abolished all assessment. No, they haven't. They just do it differently. So the similarity between them and us and assessment is that in your basic education phase, so up to the end of grade 9 or year 9 for them, the teachers are responsible for all assessment. You do it according to your curriculum objectives and outcomes. But it's left up to the teacher. You're doing that. The only actual formal assessment for them is the end of their upper secondary. So it's like our matric exam. That's when they're doing that. And yes, of course, they're assessing at that point, because otherwise, how would your universities be able to look at their intake and choose and do everything that they have to do? Of course, there has to be assessment at that point. But it's that less is more approach. They write 4 exams at that level. So they write their home language paper, and then they choose 3 others. They can write a second language or a maths exam or humanities, or physics, life science, whatever it is. They choose their other 3 examinable subjects, and they go with that.
Sure.
we are doing, I mean, our matrics are writing 7. They have a 7 subject matric as a minimum.
Yeah.
Many of them who think that they need to achieve are doing more than 7 subjects. My question is why?
Yeah.
So, and even in the classrooms, when the teachers are doing their assessment before the end of the basic education phase, it's far less assessment. But this goes back into that high quality, less supervision, lower quality, higher supervision problem. We tend to be on the higher supervision side of things. We are doing that with our kids. Our kids are skimming over so many topics, and then we're throwing a lot of assessment at them to see if they're mastering these concepts. That's part of what's not really working and needs to be refined.
And, and also, one thing to that point is they're almost educating people to hate education. Like,
this is what happens.
I mean, even if I look in the corporate environment, helping out with corporate training and being in those environments, people hate training.
Yeah.
They see it as like this big task, something that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
And education should be fun.
Absolutely.
You should be like on fire, your belly on fire to learn something new and to do something with that, and not making learning intimidating.
For sure. For sure.
So I do believe that what you're saying is 100% true. And I think what you guys are doing at your school is also disruptive. And I think what you're doing is really preparing the kids for the future. And I think it's an awesome project to be involved in. I would love to come and see what you guys are up to there.
You're welcome. Anytime. Come and have coffee.
I'll come have coffee and maybe I could learn a thing or two. Maybe. Never know. Anyway, okay, so we have come to the end of our show. I wish we could have a longer chat about this, but we still have a tradition that we have to do a 60-second
the game.
like we did last week. So we're going to do it again and see how far you can get. Now, remember, we now have to measure success, what success looks like.
So last week was 60%.
60%.
Crumbs. No pressure.
Okay. On your marks, get set, go. What would you name your boat if you had one? Maybe you do.
The Phoenix.
The Phoenix. Okay. What is the most difficult decision you ever had to make in your life?
Going to Taiwan.
What is the best and worst purchase you've ever made?
Probably both shoes.
Why do women always say that? What is your biggest screw up in the kitchen?
Oh, I did it on Sunday with a chocolate tart.
What's something your brain tries to make you do and you have the will to have not to have to do it?
My brain tries to tell me to get out of bed on time, but there's definitely no will there.
How would the world change if superheroes and supervillains actually existed?
It would be a lot more fun.
What would be your strategy for surviving an apocalyptic epidemic?
I've got my husband for that.
If you could replace the handshake as a greeting, what interesting new greeting would you replace it with?
Oh, crumbs. I don't know. Rub your head. I don't know.
What movie or book character are you most similar to?
Granny Weatherwax and Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels.
Ooh, well done!
So what did I get?
90%!
Okay.
Booyah!
Moving in the right direction.
You have proven this is the way to do it.
Yeah, there we go.
We need to look at improvement. We look at the past. We look at the future.
30% increase. I'll take that.
Now, how did you feel about this one in comparison to last week's one?
Well, the questions are equally inane.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, guys, we just want to say thank you very much for Brand Live Studio, www.brandlive.co.za, for enabling us to record in the studio and also making this available to the live audiences, and then also for recording the podcast. And then we would like to say thanks to Solid Gold Studios for managing the iTunes account and empowering our audience to never miss an episode. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a super day. Bye-bye now.